This is Liberty Wire, where journalists, experts, and the public share their firsthand accounts of what's happening in our country. Our goal is to provide a corporate-free forum for the unrestricted freedom of speech. Hi, everybody. My name is John Carlos Frey, and welcome to the podcast. Today, we have a very special guest about a topic I'm assuming very few of us, me included, know anything about. He is the executive director of an organization for Refuge, Asylum, and Migration. The organization is called ORAM. His name is Steve Roth. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, John. It's great to be here with you.
It's great to see you. And as I said, I think it's a subject matter very few people know anything about. This idea that there are LGBTQ plus people on the run internationally and an organization that advocates for their care. That's what you do. And that's what your organization. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about ORAM.
Sure. So ORAM, Organization for Refuge, Asylum, and Migration, we are the oldest international nonprofit focused exclusively on the protection and empowerment of LGBTQ refugees and asylum seekers. Just like you mentioned, we were founded in 2008. So we've been doing this work for 17 years. To your point, a lot of people don't even realize that a person can seek asylum or be deemed a refugee on the basis of their sexual orientation, but it is indeed one of the classifications determined by the United Nations for what constitutes a refugee. It's a person who has a well-founded fear of persecution in their home country based on a certain one of several criteria, and sexual orientation and gender identity is one of those criteria. And so my organization specifically, we work in what we call transit countries. So these are countries, places after someone has left their country of origin, but before they've reached a resettlement country like the US or Canada or Australia. So if you can imagine, people are often fleeing from their homes without the luxury of being able to get on a plane and fly across the world. They're often going overland. They're often going to a country that's nearby that's probably not a lot different from the country that they're fleeing from in terms of social and cultural norms, which is to say, if you're queer and you're fleeing, you may be getting someplace that is marginally more tolerant or accepting, but not a lot different. And I'll give you an example. We do a lot of work in Kenya. It's actually our biggest country of operation. And Kenya borders Uganda, which has an infamous anti-homosexuality law that was passed last year that has punishments up to and including the death penalty for so-called aggravated homosexuality. It also has a reporting clause requiring individuals to report someone who they suspect of being a member of the LGBTQ community, and there are fines for not reporting someone. So it has this effect of turning the population on itself and on each other, and creating an environment that is rife with blackmail and other things. People report those who are suspected of being gay or lesbian or trans. So there are countless reasons why people flee on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, but a lot of it has to do around violence and harassment and intimidation in the places where they live.
You are describing not necessarily a service that's provided to get people from point A to point B. You are describing a service that basically supports wherever they are in their journey. Is that right?
That's right. The sad reality is that less than 0.5% of refugees get resettled in any given year. So the vast majority of them are people who are on the move and are in transit countries, like the one that I just described. And just to put it in context, there are currently 120 million internationally displaced people worldwide. And if you just think about some of the things happening in our world today, from Israel and Gaza to Ukraine to Sudan, Syria, Venezuela, you can start to get a sense of some of these big forces that drive people to flee their countries. And then on top of that are economic reasons, are socio-political reasons, and including things like sexual orientation and gender identity.
If the individuals that you cater to, or that you would call your clients, the people that you advocate on behalf of, are fleeing their home countries, do you ever try to advocate for them to stay in their home countries or try to resolve the situation there? Or is it always better for them to leave?
That's a really great question. And honestly, it's really up to each individual. And we don't think that we are in a place to make that decision for anyone. Everyone has to decide that on their own particular situation and context. The best that we can do and other organizations can do is provide information. But our focus as an organization is really on once people have made that decision to flee and they're in the so-called transit country, we help and support them there. And transit countries, by the way, are all over the world. Of course, the big one that we as Americans, I think, all know of and think of is Mexico. Mexico is the main transit point for people trying to reach the U.S. Obviously, we hear a lot every day about what's happening at the border and efforts to stop the flow of folks reaching the U.S. But Mexico is a transit country. It's also for some increasingly, especially as the border is closing down, it's would be considered a destination country because people will stay there, including members of the LGBTQ community, which can be a solution, but it can also be very challenging depending, of course, on what part of the country you're in.
You say a transit country. A transit country is an in-between place before you get to where you would like to go finally, where you would like to settle and set down roots.
That's right.
And you had suggested one of those transit countries where you work is in Kenya.
Correct.
And Kenya not necessarily being even that safe for a queer person. Is that right?
That's right. And that's one of the paradoxes. So Kenya is one of only 2 countries in all of Africa that accepts refugees on the basis of their sexual orientation and gender identity. Africa, by the way, has the largest number of countries that criminalize same-sex relations. There are still 60 plus countries around the world that criminalize just being LGBTQ, some with up to and including the death penalty. Kenya is one of only 2 countries that accepts, in theory at least, refugees and asylum seekers on the basis of their sexual orientation and gender identity. However, it's also one of those countries that criminalizes same-sex relations. There's a huge amount of homophobia and transphobia. There is currently an anti-homosexuality bill very similar to Uganda's that's under consideration in the Kenyan parliament. So it's not a great situation. And then the other thing to think about with being an LGBTQ refugee is you now have layered levels of marginalization. So, refugees in the best of circumstances will often face discrimination and challenges on the basis of their country of origin, the language they speak, their citizenship status, their access to work, things like that. Imagine on top of all that, then facing discrimination because of your sexual orientation or your gender identity. And it creates a really, really difficult context for people and just for living their daily lives. And Kenya, by the way, has what is called an encampment policy, which means that refugees in the country, by definition, are supposed to be in one of the 2 refugee camps. Kenya is also one of the largest refugee hosting populations in the world, with about 500,000 refugees. And these camps are in I've been to one of the camps 3 times, Kakuma refugee camp, and it's in a very kind of godforsaken part of the country that is arid and cut off from the rest of the country. It's up near the South Sudan border. And it's an incredibly hostile environment for anyone, let alone for a person who's gender nonconforming or non-binary or trans, or even just a very effeminate gay man or a butch lesbian. I mean, the violence and discrimination these people face is appalling. I was in the camp last year around this time, and I met a young refugee who's wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, and he started telling the story of being chased and attacked by some people in the camp. They actually came into his tent at night while he was sleeping, and they tried to stab him while he was sleeping. And with that, he takes off the glasses, and he'd actually gotten stabbed in the eye, and he had lost an eye over this. And when he fought back and they weren't able to kill him by stabbing him, they tried to shoot him to kill him, and the bullet just grazed his head, and he played dead, and they left him alone. And he has survived, but with these grave wounds. He's still in the camp. He still faces a lot of the insecurities and challenges. And the path for resettlement now, sadly, that very, very narrow path that might have existed in the past, at least resettlement to the U.S., is now closed under some of the new Trump executive orders that we're now seeing.
if I am a queer person, and I use the term queer as a catch-all, I don't mean to be offensive by anybody who identifies in any other way. It's just not necessarily easier for me, but it's the way that I identify those of us who are not heterosexual, or what people would call, binary or heteronormative. So queer for me is a catch-all. So if I'm leaving Uganda because I'm threatened with my life, and then I go to Kenya to a camp, I'm going to be threatened with my life, is what you've just described. This is the harbor. This is the safe place, and then I have to live in a camp in a tent. What is life like at least in Kenya? You just did describe it a little bit, but can you just sort of tell me what a daily life is? I'm not really looking for a job. I'm not going to be able to go to school, start my business, get married. I'm what? I'm just waiting day by day.
That's really it. You described it pretty well, John. It's being a refugee or an asylum seeker is really about, it's living in a state of limbo. It's about a constant uncertainty. It's waiting for months or sometimes years for even a single word on the status of your asylum case or your application for refugee status. And in a place like Kenya, the truth is it's a really hard scrabble life, and you get basic materials to build a shelter, but again, you're living out in the middle of the desert, usually off the grid, without any other kind of basic resources, and facing extreme homophobia and transphobia. In the urban setting, primarily in Nairobi, folks are facing other challenges. And while there may be a marginally higher level of tolerance, there's still a huge amount of discrimination. And I can still remember meeting and speaking with a trans refugee who was living in Nairobi. She had fled Uganda recently, and because of the new law, and she had gone to a medical clinic to get healthcare, because whereas you're in the camp, you'll get healthcare provided by some of the international NGOs, and in the urban setting, you do not. And so she went to a local clinic, and when she identified herself as a woman, someone on the staff started questioning her, and then called other staff people over and said, "This man is claiming to be a woman," and they just ridiculed her there, right in kind of the waiting area of the medical facility. And not only did she leave humiliated, but she didn't get any of the medical care or treatment that she was there for. So facing those kinds of daily discrimination and injustices is what a lot of folks really do face. And it's particularly challenging, again, especially in the urban environment. People have no source of income. People still need to fend for themselves and survive. And so this is where my organization comes in, and the work that we do, which in Kenya, a lot of it is focused around economic empowerment. So it's providing skills and training so that folks can either get jobs or start their own businesses. And, we've had a lot of success doing this. We've helped over 300 LGBTQ refugees last year, going through training programs, getting entrepreneurship training, starting their own businesses. It's a process that takes an investment in time and resources, but it does yield results. And it yields results not only on the economic front, but we've also seen, and this is kind of like a really positive, unexpected side benefit, but that it has positive mental health impacts on folks as well, because people have something to do. They're not just in that constant state of waiting. They're learning new skills. They're becoming productive. They're able to improve their lives. And our hope is that folks can gain skills that they can then take with them wherever they go, or that will serve them if they should stay in a place like Kenya, or if they move on someplace else.
So your work is to support the individual who can no longer stay in their home country, and then trying to support them wherever they decide to end up, or to maybe even help them in their journey from point A to point B. I'm assuming that the ultimate goal for most of them would be some form of refugee status or asylum claim in the United States, possibly Canada. Are there any other receiving countries that are preferable?
Yeah, that is the goal for most folks. A couple other refugee receiving areas include parts of Northern and Western Europe. Germany, of course, famously opened doors to refugees, particularly Syrian refugees, in the last 10 years. Scandinavian countries have also welcomed refugees. The numbers in the bigger picture, though, are small. We're talking about, a Scandinavian country that might take in, in the thousands or possibly tens of thousands. But when you've got 120 million displaced people, you can see how those numbers the odds become very hard.
Do we know how many queer folk are displaced?
We don't, unfortunately, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, the basic is just that there's not good counting of folks by their sexual orientation and gender identity, and this is something that we and other organizations advocate for. But it's also a complicated issue because there are so many points of risk that information and data could be compromised and used against the folks by self-revealing their status.
Right. That obviously makes sense. Let's just say, for example, that an individual that you're advocating on behalf of wants to get to the United States. What are the basic criteria for an individual to apply and qualify for asylum? Let's say, how would I be able to get from Uganda to the United States legally by making a legal claim of asylum? What do I need?
Yeah, so there are two ways that happens in the U.S. In this country, by law, through the Refugee Act of 1980, we recognize two paths to being recognized as a refugee in the United States. One is through the refugee admission process, and the other is through asylum. So the refugee process happens outside of the country. So since we were talking about the example of Kenya, so someone from Uganda comes to Kenya, and they go to the camp, and they would register at the camp and say that they are there to seek asylum. They have a well-founded fear of persecution in their home country, and then they would start that application process. Again, for LGBT people, it's complicated by the fact that they don't know the friendliness of the person they're talking to. Again, given what I was sharing about, say, in Kenya, in that example, not being a welcoming society, how that news would be received. Often translators are involved. Perhaps the interviewer doesn't speak the language that the person is being interviewed in. Again, then that would probably be someone from their home country that would be conducting the interview, which could bias the whole process. So it's just, there are a lot of barriers and things stacked against queer people when they're applying for refugee status. The other way, which is probably more familiar to people even if they don't realize it, but that's the asylum status. And that is that once you are in the United States, you can seek asylum by, again, going to one of our immigration agencies and stating that you have a well-founded fear of persecution in your home country, and request to start the asylum process. And again, by law, people have the right to do that. And this is what we've seen happen, over the years and decades up until now that the border has been closed, which is effectively denying that option and the adjudication of that process that normally accompanies it.
How can I prove that I'm being persecuted? Do I have to have documents, video? I mean, it seems like my word against maybe the federal government's questions. What do I have to prove? That I've been beaten, that I have been near death, that I have somehow, I don't know how you are able to document evidence enough to convince the people who are trying to judge whether or not you deserve to have asylum.
Sure, that's some of it. And people do often provide photos and images, and videos even are some of the pieces of evidence. Third-party collaboration and stories and witness testimonies, that can be another thing. We also have an important document that's used a lot in American courts. It's called a country of origin report. My organization, ORAM, has actually authored a number of these. So say you have a trans asylum seeker from El Salvador who is in this country, and her case is being adjudicated. Her attorney can, hopefully she has an attorney, can submit as evidence a country of origin report on El Salvador, which confirms, we've written them, there's 70, 80 pages that provide evidence of the institutional barriers against people in these countries, the level of discrimination, the fact that El Salvador has one of the highest murder rates for transgender women in the world. So this country of origin report can become part of the documentation in the asylum process. So it's just like any other case, it's a collection of evidence and to bolster a case.
So it's pretty well understood that if I'm coming from Uganda and I'm queer, chances are that I'm being persecuted.
That one in particular, and I mean, there's a lot of media coverage today of the peril and that queer people are in Uganda right now and the challenges they face. And you hear of this concept, honor killings. It's a true thing. If it's considered in many countries, including Uganda, dishonorable to have someone, a member of your family, who's gay or lesbian or trans, and to kind of clear their name, family members will torture and or kill their own family members who are just even suspected of being a member of the community. We see this happen, and there are human rights reports documenting it.
Is it safe to say that there are very few places in the world for LGBTQ plus folks? I mean, I'm assuming that people are fleeing because of their queerness in one way or another, and there are very few places for them to go and to be safe and to be out and to live sort of out in proud, prosperous lives.
Yeah, it's really true. There are limited numbers of countries, and we've seen the pendulum swing in both ways. And I think in the aughts and into the teens of this century, we were seeing more countries get rid of their anti-LGBTQ laws, seeing more countries legalize the right to same-sex marriage, and now we're seeing the pendulum swing back in the other direction. And to throw something out there that might be a little mind-blowing, but that is a reality in this very country, in the United States right now, and that is that we now have, in what we call in this space, internally displaced individuals. So we have internally displaced LGBT people, meaning you now have trans people living in states with virulently anti-trans laws. Texas comes to mind, who are now having to flee that state to live in a state where they can receive gender-affirming care or not be fired, just simply on the basis of their gender identity. Yeah, in some ways, sadly, that list is narrowing.
This idea of being a refuge for those that are fleeing, the United States being a refuge for those that are fleeing, the poem on the Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, give me your poor, give me your yearning to breathe free. When you take a look at asylum law and you take a look at trying to gain refugee status, there's no welcoming here. This is a maze. It's an obstacle course. There are so many barriers. It does not feel that there is any place for somebody who's fleeing persecution, especially if you're queer, to qualify. It feels like almost winning the lottery. You have better odds. So I don't know how you open the doors. If the United States is the best place for somebody to come, the doors are not very open here either, and obviously not at all now. But I mean, even during the Biden administration, it was not easy to get here.
The Biden administration had agreed to allow up to 125,000 refugees into the country per year. They never got even up to that full amount because they had to rebuild the refugee resettlement system after Trump had dismantled it the first time around. But if you think about 125,000 people, even in the best case scenario, in a country of 330 million, it's not even a fraction of a percent. It's really a rounding error. And so it is a tiny number. And then if you imagine the number of slots or available spaces that could be for LGBTQ people in that, it's truly just a handful.
All I can think about is the lack of assistance and the lack of support.
Right? It's dire.
But how many organizations such as yours that are actually on the ground reaching out to individuals trying to provide some form of assistance? I'm assuming that it's not very many.
Very, very few. You'll have local grassroots organizations that try. There's such competition for limited resources.
I'm assuming that this is a global problem. Do you have heard about hotspots, places around the world where this is where people are fleeing, queer folks are fleeing?
Yeah, it really is a global issue. Africa does have more countries that criminalize same-sex relations than any other continent in the world. So it's an acute problem in Africa. El Salvador and Honduras have the world's highest rates of murder for trans people. So, imagine being a transgender woman and all the challenges of gang violence and drug violence, everything else in these countries, and then to be transgender on top of that, people literally are fleeing for their lives. And so folks from those contexts, of course, will usually come overland via Guatemala into Mexico, and from there make their way up towards the United States. And under the Biden administration, there was an app called CBP-1, Customs and Border Patrol 1, that actually worked fairly well, where people could apply for their case online. And if they came from a particularly vulnerable and marginalized community, particularly trans folks and gender nonconforming folks, then there was a higher likelihood that their cases would be accepted. Not that their case was granted, but that the government would agree to review their case, in which case they were allowed to wait in the U.S. while their case was adjudicated. That has all stopped under the Trump administration. This administration has put into effect. I heard that President Trump bragging in his speech last night that they've issued over 120 executive orders, I think. And there's one entitled "Stopping the Invasion at the U.S. Southern Border." Which is how people, again, these people that we're talking about who are fleeing for their lives are being classified.
Well, if you take it one step further, his declaration of an emergency at the border allowed him to bring the U.S. military. So, exactly. I mean, that's kind of a side note, but what it purports is that the U.S. military is necessary to stop a whole bunch of queer people from gaining access to the United States, or economic migrants, or people looking for a job, or people who are fleeing disasters or war. Somehow we need military might.
Right.
So the reason for kind of setting it up that way, these people are not only persecuted in their own country, they're persecuted by the way that they're portrayed.
Of course,
we have to be afraid of them. We can't be inviting anymore.
Right. And clearly the message is that the door is closed, and again, Congress passed a law more than 40 years ago, the Refugee Act of 1980, which encodes in law the fact that we offer asylum to people, we offer refuge to folks who are being resettled who have refugee status in another country, and these actions all really, contravene those laws that are in place and those policies that we have.
Okay, so I'm going to be a dick for a second. Hard to believe, I know. Deal with your own problems. So what? We don't invite people in. So what? We've shut down Asylum. Listen, we've got enough problems within our own borders. We don't have enough money to feed our own, get people to get an education. Whatever it is that the U.S. is going through, it's not our problem. So what? I mean, what do we suffer as a country if we shut the asylum door?
Well, I think it's an affront to our values and who we are. And, John, your podcast is called Liberty Wire. And, you were quoting the inscription from the Statue of Liberty, give us your tired, you're poor, those yearning to be free. And, this is who we have been as a country. We're a country of immigrants, first of all. And, we have been the world's leader in recognizing and supporting refugees going back to World War II, and the many millions of people who fled the atrocities of World War II. And this is who we are, and it's part of our DNA. And I certainly agree. I don't think anyone would disagree that the process needs to be orderly and that our laws need to be respected in the process, but that those processes should exist and people should be able to avail themselves of those. And that's not currently happening.
Can you think, other than sort of our charter as a culture, as a country, to be a welcoming country for immigrants, can you think of benefits? Like, okay, let's bring asylum seekers here and let them build a life. What do we get out of that?
Absolutely. There is a great case. I mean, if you want to talk business cases, there's a great business case for refugees as contributors to economic growth and engines of growth. And one thing I always like to think about is, and that's we have this image of refugees and asylum seekers as being, I don't know, kind of these downtrodden people or people at the bottom of the heap. But in my mind, these are actually the winners. These are the people that had the courage and the wherewithal and the stamina to and the commitment to really leave everything they knew behind to pursue something better. These are people who bring a great degree of drive and ingenuity and resourcefulness and willingness to work that can and should be a real asset and benefit to this country.
I don't know how you're going to maneuver the times. You're not getting funded. You're not being welcomed. The doors are closed. What are you going to do?
Well, it doesn't change the reality of the situation, and we're going to keep advocating and we're going to keep fighting because, and it's also about changing that narrative and that message. And it's so preposterous, this claim that asylum seekers, yes, the Haitians in particular, are here on a temporary protective status, that they're, eating pets. It's just outlandish. But, if we only tell those stories, then those stories get legs, and that's what people believe. And we need to tell and bring to light the stories of everyone else, and not to mention the grave situation that people face in the countries that they're in. But again, this is why for ORAM and for our work, we choose to focus to protect and empower people where they are, because for better or for worse, that's where they're going to be. Where they are going to be for a long time, if not indefinitely. And everyone deserves to have gainful employment. Everyone deserves to have skills that they can both use now or take with them. And people deserve to be masters of their own destiny. And, that's what we're focused on and what we're going to continue to focus on. But again, with the huge sucking out of funding from the federal government that's created an overall shortfall, we all need more resources to do this work.
Do you have a sense, if you can put your philosophical hat on for a second, do you have a sense as to why we seem to be going backward here? You're talking about laws that were enacted in 1980. That's almost 50 years ago, or just a little under 50 years ago, to protect people who were being marginalized or persecuted, or people who were fleeing their homelands. And here we've done a 180.
Right.
We are now afraid of whatever term is being used by the current administration: migrant, immigrant, illegal alien. They're all kind of slapped all together. Do you have a sense as to why we have this sort of reversal? USAID funding is gone.
Yeah, I think there's some much bigger issues at play, honestly, because for better or for worse, it's not just happening in this country. We're seeing this around the world. We're seeing a move towards authoritarianism. We're seeing moves towards anti-globalism. It's really tribalism. It's really, I think personally, that it's a backlash to the many decades of globalization that we've experienced in this world. I think, if you're talking about the U.S. specifically, I think it's a backlash against the growing diversity in our country, and changes in structures and in the power structure. And I think people don't like it. I think there's a regressiveness that's dominating our political and social culture right now. And again, it's not happening just in the U.S., but around the world. If you look at the number of countries with, authoritarian leaders, and, what's happening in this country at this very moment is really a move away from the global systems that have been in place since World War II.
When it comes to the United States, are you willing to admit that there is a form of racism here? I think that the Trump administration has blatantly spoken out against foreign countries and closing the door to migration, except for South Africans, white South Africans. I mean, that's not my statement. That's the administration's statement. So I don't think it's a dog whistle anymore. Is that there a component? You're talking about people coming from Africa. We don't want them.
Right. Obviously, in the language that the administration uses to talk about immigrants, about refugees, about asylum seekers, framing them as, drug dealers and terrorists and criminals and escapees from mental institutions. It's, you know, it's incredibly damaging. And let's add to that, and let's not forget that on top of all that is the attacks that this administration is taking against the LGBTQ community, and particularly trans people. And there's a specific executive order on so-called gender ideology, and this is just another way to say attacks on transgender people. And the administration is now claiming that there are only two genders, and that your gender identity can only match that to which you are assigned at birth. Let's not forget that while refugees and immigrants are being attacked through racist attacks, that LGBT people are very blatantly, and particularly trans people, being attacked by this government. And the communities that we serve are at the intersections of those two attacks.
You're painting a very bleak picture. I'm sorry. I'm hoping that the people that are listening to this or watching this are not depressed. I think that the silver lining here is that there are people on the ground like you who are nonstop advocating and fighting and making sure that these people are protected and making sure that individuals are cared for. I want to talk maybe in the last bit of time that we have on this administration, like we haven't been already, but specifically, what has the Trump administration done to asylum seekers? What are the executive orders that he has signed that are now in effect?
Right. So there is the executive order that was entitled Stopping the Immigration at the Border, which has effectively halted the asylum system. So there's not a way for someone to seek asylum anymore, either at the border or once they're in the country. They've done away with any mechanisms to support that. I mentioned that CBP One app that was disabled on the day that the inauguration happened. We actually had clients that were in Tijuana that had an appointment in their CBP One app for the following day, the 21st of January, and the appointment canceled on the 21st, and they're now stuck in Tijuana. They were that close to being admitted in the U.S. while their case was processed, and that was stopped. The other executive order, it was targeting the refugee resettlement system. And this, again, is the system that under Biden was resettling up to 125,000 refugees into the country every year. And that has now been paused in theory while the system is reexamined. But just one look at the way that DOJ and some of the other forces that work in this administration are have already completely dismantled USAID, are now dismantling the State Department. And we understand that the division within State Department, which is the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, which oversees all this work, is the next under the knife. That it's hard to see how that program is going to come back. They've even ended some of the best new programs. You mentioned temporary protective status, but also there's been a great new community sponsorship initiative, which is based on a great Canadian model, whereby community groups could together take an offer to sponsor a resettled refugee, and take on part of that responsibility for getting them integrated in society. It was a great program. It was getting great traction. That has all been completely put on hold as well.
I don't know how you continue to do your work. It's not a question. I just am listening to you and all the doors that are shut. I have a question before you comment on what I just said. Do you have a sense as to why the administration has shut the door to asylum seekers, possibly permanently, and has defunded any programs that will give refuge to people who are seeking asylum?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a particular window into the administration's.
They didn't give a reason. They didn't say we're shutting this down because.
Yeah, of course they claim that it's for the safety of Americans, and a part of furtherance of the America First policy. Failing to acknowledge that we can take care of the people in our country and also extend a hand to folks, in the most desperate need of help as well. We can do both of those things at the same time.
You understand the administration's stance on this is a national security issue?
I think that's part of their argument. I think it's security related. I think it's economic related as well.
They're trying to save money or stop spending needless money, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to hypothesize on what the government is doing. Leave it to them. But they're speaking through their actions
and shutting the door.
Yes. And to answer your question, how do we continue doing the work that we do? I would just say that it's now needed more than ever. And, our focus at ORAM has always been on refugees and asylum seekers in transit country, whether that's Mexico here close to the US or Kenya in East Africa or Germany and Central Europe. And, we're doubling down, and we know that a lot of organizations are being impacted dramatically by these funding cuts, that many are going to close their doors. Experts in our field in global LGBT advocacy estimate that half of all organizations working on global LGBT issues will be closed in a year. And so it's really important that we're one of those that stays operational and vibrant and honestly growing to continue to deliver the services that we do, because they're needed now more than ever and will be into the foreseeable future.
You need funding.
We need funding. We need attention. We need support. We need people to know that being an LGBTQ refugee is a thing, that many, many thousands of people have to flee the countries that they grew up in for their own safety and for their own lives, and that this particular population has unique challenges that even other refugees don't face.
I don't think that you necessarily lose sleep at night because you're thinking of innovative ways to keep the machine running. That's what I'm hearing you say it, regardless, because you've been thrown quite a few roadblocks here, and you're not going to quit.
No, and I think there are different directions that we can go in. We'd certainly continue to work with partners to find other countries that may still be open to resettling refugees, although those channels are narrowing. We continue to find innovative new ways to support the people we serve. In the countries where we serve, we opened a digital learning center in Kenya the year before last, where we teach folks skills to work from a computer, from the safety of their own home, from a laptop, online freelance work. We're now focusing on graphic design and other skills. These are particularly good for trans folks, gender nonconforming folks who can't work safely in the general workforce. So we're constantly innovating and looking for new ways to support people and give people the tools so that they can live empowered lives. And I will tell you, one of the things that's always moved me and driven me in this work is, I'm a gay man. I know what it's like to face discrimination. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest in the 80s. But I don't know if I would have the courage to actually leave everything behind that I know, to flee the country, just to be who I am. And these are people who are incredibly committed to authenticity and to being their authentic selves. And these are the kind of people that we should be celebrating and opening the door for, not closing the door on.
You started your organization how long ago?
Well, I didn't start it. I took over from a founding executive director. We were started 17 years ago, and I've been running it for almost 6 years. And
is it harder now than it was back when you started?
We've never been in a moment this hard, this difficult in all the time that I've been with the organization. And that includes COVID. I was around when COVID hit, which, had a dramatic impact on refugees and on our ability to get to them, in any organization, to get to them and serve them. But this is, even that doesn't compare to this moment that we're in.
Don't you ever just want to throw it all in and just say, I can't do this anymore?
Often, but it's we just move on from those moments and realize one thing I take away from this work is also a tremendous sense of gratitude for the life that I do have, and what I call the accident of birth, and just the fact that I happened to be born where I was when I was, and I travel and I take these trips to refugee camps and in the countries that we serve. And I've been to Uganda, and I find myself staring at my passport and thinking, because of just the passport that I happen to have, I can come and go as I please in most countries around the world. Whereas, other people who need that ability much more than I do, you don't have that. And it's, it's that accident of birth that gives us privilege that others don't have, that I think we, need to extend that hand to help them.
Well said. I have just a last little section of questions for you, or concerns.
Sure.
Do you, as an organization, try and raise awareness for advocacy to try and demystify what it is to be trans or queer or migrant or asylum seeker, to kind of take the stigma off? Do you have those kinds of programs?
That work is very important. At the same time, we're a really small organization. We're about a $1.5 million a year organization. We have 14 staff, and so we have limited capacity in what we can do. But something related to that we have always prided ourselves on and focused on is being a platform for queer refugee voices. And so if you look at our website, if you look at our social media and all of our channels, we feature a lot of the stories of the people that we serve. And the idea is to give them a voice, give them agency, enable them to tell their stories. There are often safety concerns, and you'll often see that we don't show people's faces and we change names, but people are eager to tell their stories and, for the world to get to know them. And it's, when I get the chance to meet with the people that we serve, it's just a reminder that they all want the same things that we do. They want to, they want to meet someone and fall in love. They want to get a good job. They want to, go dancing and have fun. It's just, we're all the same. It's just a lot of people have, a much more difficult chance or opportunity to be who they are. And so telling those stories is really important.
In my lifetime, I have known the United States, good or bad, not perfect, to be a leader in this space of opening its doors and allowing people from marginalized communities or people fleeing whatever form of persecution that they were suffering. And now I don't even recognize my country anymore. One of the reasons for starting this podcast is to bring voices like yours who exemplify what it means to be American. So I wonder, the reason I asked you about this, raising awareness, and now you're telling me that you raise the voices of the individuals. I wonder if it would have an effect on the administration. If the Trump administration knew who these people were and what they were going through and what charade and obstacle course they have put them through, do you think they would bend? Do you think that they would open up or change their minds? I don't have a sense that they would.
Yeah, I think the hardcore people driving these policies, I think are hell-bent, from what I've seen, are hell-bent on implementing these policies and approaches. But, I'd like to think that we can appeal to the better angels of the majority of people in our country, and that most people are fundamentally good people, and maybe a lot of people have been misled and fed sound bites and have not gotten to know the people behind words like refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants and LGBT people. And so that's why this work is so important. Platforms like yours and this podcast are so important, and being able to tell those stories and give voice to the voiceless is so important. And, sadly, I don't think anything's going to change overnight. I think this administration, well, they are just getting started. They're 6 weeks in and they're going hard and going strong. And we have to start pushing back and keep pushing back. And it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of work. And, but that doesn't mean that we don't do it, that we just walk away from it. So that's where I'm at.
You sound like you have hope.
What's the other option?
It's bleak. You're not getting funded. There's no asylum law that allows people into the country. You're advocating for a group of people that are considered to be, I don't know, sinners or criminal. They're marginalized beyond belief. They're coming from places where to be queer is to have committed a crime and possibly be put to death.
Mm-hmm.
So where does the hope fit in? So you say, what's the alternative? I don't know. What is the alternative?
Yeah. Again, the hope for me is, meeting the folks that we serve who, against all odds, have gotten themselves out of truly dangerous situations that are on journeys to improve their lives, and they still have hope, and they have hope in us. And not to overuse this word, but it was one of the lasting memories I have from my last trip to Kenya, which was last March. And I spent about 3 weeks there and met with refugees we served both in Nairobi and in Kakuma refugee camp. And two things they told us, because our work isn't perfect, and there are a lot of people that we don't reach, and always more funding and support and training and education is needed. But what they consistently tell me is that we give them hope, and however imperfect the work is, that we give them hope to keep going. And the other thing that they tell me, and especially after we've been in Kenya for 6 years doing this work, is that they trust us. And those two things are so important and really hard to replace, and not something that you can get instantly: hope and trust. And so we're just trying to build on both of those and do everything we can to change the system.
So lastly, we'll get a little woo-woo on you, surprise. There's something about, you've mentioned it a couple of times, but maybe just to solidify it for the last point. You talked a little bit about the immigrant spirit, and I'm using the term immigrant as a catch-all, right?
Sure.
People who are leaving their homeland, whether it's an asylum seeker or fleeing persecution, they are uprooting and going elsewhere. And the people who do that are the people who don't put up with the status quo or put up with less than or persecution. They say, no, I'm going to better my life. I'm not going to tolerate this.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned from that spirit. And it seems to me that the United States has lost that understanding. Instead of protecting what we have and walling ourselves off and shutting the doors and whites only kind of philosophy, or keep all of our money and not help anyone else, I think we've lost that understanding of an immigrant spirit, which founded this country and makes us stronger. So I'm wondering what your thoughts about that kind of understanding.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I don't know why, I don't fully understand why we're in the moment that we are in, and why so many people feel threatened by folks from other countries or other sexual orientations and gender identities, other backgrounds. But yeah, we're in that moment, and we're at the same time, we're a country that's built on immigration. We're all Americans. We're all, unless you're completely Native American, we're all immigrants, and our ancestors come from other places. And so, it's really one of our great strengths. And the founding fathers of this country, the founding parents of this country knew that. It's why our coins say "E pluribus unum," out of many one. It's one of our great strengths. And so I think we've lost our way on these issues. And I think that the pendulum will swing back. I think we have to all keep working hard for it to swing back. I think it's this backlash to globalization and fear of the unknown, and fear of what's new, and resistance to change, and a desire to hold on to something real or imagined of the way that people think that things are or were or they want them to be. But it's not the reality of the world that we live in, or the country that we are.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. And I hope that people understand a little bit more about your work and about your organization, oramrefugee.org. You can send money. You can support this organization. The government has shit on this organization and the work that they do. So it's going to require people to help. And I hope that you do. And I hope that you come back and tell us how it's going. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, John. Appreciate it.
For more information about our podcast and links to the shows, you can listen to us on libertywire.org or Facebook at LibertyWire and YouTube at Liberty-Wire, or wherever you get your podcasts.